No one goes out shopping for personal injury. Yeah. No one's waking up looking to get hit by a bus or, fall into a combine or something horrible. It's a different sort of trickier approach. And it still is very relevant to have a clear, detailed picture of who you want to talk to. Because this helps you get into the mindset of, okay, what do they care about? What are they thinking about? And then that can get you started in thinking of ways that you can talk to them effectively and authentically. Getting like a real connection with folks is really important. But it starts with figuring out who they are and who you want to talk to.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm really looking forward to sharing today's conversation with marketing creative consultant Zach Morvant with you. Zach's background as a creative includes working within large companies like Survey Monkey and Scribd, at the agency level, and running his own creative consulting company. In the brevity and brilliance department, he's the best wordsmith I've come across, with his ability to pack punchy messaging into very few words. With Zach's help, we'll dive into how to best work with marketing and creative types to help build successful messaging and branding. Zach approaches his creative work with the same discipline and determination that he applies to his other passions, cycling. There, his mastery in diverse styles includes fixed gear, road, gravel, ultra distance, and rendinuring that have placed him on countless podiums. Most recently in first place at the 200-mile Firewood Road Race in Alaska, where he spent a good portion of his childhood. You can follow Zach's adventures on Instagram at @ZMorvant. So please sit back and enjoy this illuminating conversation as we explore the wide world of marketing and learn how we all can be better at it. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Thank you, Miles. It's a pleasure to be here or here. Can I address the elephant in the room?
Please.
That normally I'm in the room with you on the other side of the cameras and operating the audio equipment and taking notes for promotional stuff and yada, yada. And here we are trying our first foray into remote recording. And so now I'm doing this at home, which feels a little weird, but we also Zoom a lot. So it doesn't feel that weird.
I did feel a little strange welcoming you to the show, knowing that you've been at every one so far. So it's really wonderful to have you on this side of the microphone and the camera, because I'm really interested in having our conversation about marketing, branding, creative, and all of the work that you do and knowledge that you have to help people like us, lawyers, people running firms, businesses, be able to make sure that they get their message out in a way that's meaningful. But before we dive into that, I'd love to get a little bit about your background in terms of who you are, where you grew up, and kind of the path you followed to get to where you are now.
Yeah, it's so I've got a bit of a weird background in that I grew up in Alaska, which is the largest and least populated state in the Union. Growing up there, we called the rest of the United States the lower 48, for those not familiar. Or outside is a popular term. Oh, they're from outside. So, which is anywhere outside of the massive wilderness of Alaska. I grew up there till I was 14 years old. I grew up in a small town that most people have never heard of called Eagle River. The nearest point of geographic reference for most folks is going to be Anchorage. Anchorage is the big city in Alaska. Like half the population lives in or around the Anchorage area. Eagle River is about 15, 20 miles northeast. It was maybe a few thousand people when I was growing up. Very small town. I think I recall some passionate discussions amongst adults about the future of what was then like this giant, mostly empty lot with a 7-Eleven in it, what its future was going to be, and eventually became a Walmart. There was a lot of NIMBYism going on in opposition to this giant thing, giant commercial thing coming into this small town, and now I think no one can live without it. I'm speaking of this in detail because I was just there recently, visiting my hometown just a couple of weeks ago with my family because they'd never been. But so Alaska, grew up there. I was a weird kid who liked to read a lot and play video games. I had a paper route I delivered for a weekly paper called the Eagle River Star, which is now defunct. During the summer months, I'd ride my bicycle around the neighborhood and throw the paper out, classic paperboy style. During the winter months, I would drag my sled uphill with my papers in it and ride it downhill. A lot of hills in the neighborhood. Yeah, and then high school came. My dad was an oil guy. Like most people who live in Alaska, they tend to work in oil, the military, lumber, fishing, tourism. Those are kind of like the big five employers up there, or something that supports one of those industries. So oil brought us up to Alaska. Oil brought us down to California. I went to high school in Arcadia, so the suburbs of Los Angeles, which growing up in this small, lush, green, idyllic kind of like town nestled in a valley, then being thrust into the suburbs of Los Angeles with all the concrete and like the desert flora and fauna, and everything was kind of like brown and crispy as opposed to like lush and green. And there's traffic and rush hour and people who just walk past you without even talking to you. It was quite a shift, to say the least. Also, I was going into high school. That's like the weirdest age to move.
It's a tough time to move.
Middle schoolers are already just awkward and weird, and then you completely like upend their whole social situation and uproot them from any friends they might have had. And here, go to this massive high school with like 3,000 people in it. Yeah, it was an adjustment, for sure. But yeah, quickly fell in with some drama nerds. Um, and just I found the other weirdos, and became friends with them. But I was never really an LA guy. Didn't really adapt in the LA area. As soon as I could get out college, I moved up to the Bay Area, Berkeley, and the Bay's been my home pretty much ever since. Fell right in. Just I was in love with the history of like the counterculture movement and the intellectual movements going on, that like a lot of them started in Berkeley. A lot of the guests that you've had on who have participated in those things or were like adjacent to them during their time. That was always it was cool. It's been cool seeing those folks on your show, knowing that they directly inspired my choice to move to Berkeley and move to the city after graduating.
And I'm going to interject a question on the Berkeley experience. Was your focus in some form of communications, writing, rhetoric in your background there?
It's funny you say the word focus. I didn't really have a focus. I went into Berkeley undeclared. I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. It was like kind of an academic buffet for me. I think I recall I was taking computer science because I was really into video games for a while and thought I might work in video games at some point. Turns out I'm not awesome at math, and computer science, especially at Berkeley, is really, really effing hard. So I think I got like a passing grade in my first class and realized this probably wasn't for me. I took some English classes because I'd also always wanted to be a writer of some kind, since I was a small kid, and my parents being very practical were like, no, don't be a writer. There's no money. There's no money in writing.
You must be so thrilled at setting them straight on that.
Well, I'll get to that. I'll get to my discovery of what a copywriter was, because I didn't know for the longest time. But so I kind of dabbled in a lot of stuff. One of my parents was like, just get a degree with an ology in it. That sounds more legit than something else like philosophy or English or one of these other kind of soft sounding things, which, having an engineer for a parent seems like a tracks, right?
Yeah.
And so eventually I fell into sociology, which was just fascinating to me. I loved the blend of history, of psychology, the dynamics of how people work in groups, how societies have evolved, different like mechanisms for culture and social control. Really fascinating stuff. I think one of my teachers was she taught at the anthropology department, was Laura Nader, who, if that name sounds familiar, is the Ralph Nader's sister. And in one of my many odd jobs, I was a facilities worker one summer on campus, and the silly job we had was to earthquake-proof various pieces of furniture, and for very tall bookshelves, basically this meant attaching giant L brackets from the top of a bookshelf to the adjoining wall. And Laura Nader's office was one of these offices we had to do this to. And on her desk, I shit you not, there's a typewriter flanked by 2 bottles of Stoli. That memory stuck out with me.
Yeah.
for a while. But yeah, I had a lot of different odd jobs during my college years. I was a campus safety officer for a hot minute. I think I thought I wanted to work in law enforcement for a little bit. Turns out I didn't. I the facilities job I just mentioned. I was a pizza delivery guy for a bit. All kinds of little odd jobs throughout college to help pay the bills. Um, Graduate from college. I got my sociology degree. I continue to do what one with a sociology degree does when they've graduated from college, and that is I kept working in restaurants and bars. Um, there wasn't a very robust job market at the time. This was kind of at the onset of the recession.
Yeah.
So I was bartending. I moved to the city. I didn't care. I was having fun. I was in my early 20s. I lived with like 3 other guys who were all working in service industry jobs in a house near Stern Grove. We bartended, we partied a lot. We ruined this poor rental house that we existed in. And while I was going there and doing that whole thing, I had a neighbor who was going to the Academy of Art University. And, she would come over and hang out. She knew one of my roommates, and she'd occasionally ask for help with homework. She was going to advertising school. And basically what you do in advertising school is you create a portfolio so you can get a job. And what an advertising portfolio for a creative person tends to entail is having a bunch of fake ads. Basically, you're making up ads for different companies, brands, products and services to show potential employers that you have skills. First off, you have the skills to do the job. If you're a creative person, you're going to be tracking toward being an art director or a copywriter is kind of how they would track people in ad school at the time. I think things are a bit more fluid these days, but that was kind of you chose a specialty.
Okay.
So you want to show your technical prowess as well as your creative thinking. Like, can you think of like big out there ideas? Like how far can you push an idea to make it memorable, to make people, want to buy the thing or at least be a part of some kind of movement, be a fan of a brand, whatever. So she'd ask me for help making fake ads, and I would help her write stuff. And she's like, "You're good at this. You should be a copywriter." And I said, "What the fuck is a copywriter?" 'Cause I had no idea this was a job, but logically, someone has to write ads, right? Why hadn't I never thought of this before?
When you're doing the fake ads, are they fake products? Are you coming up with jingles or content or copy for an existing brand where you're doing your own spin on it?
Mostly the latter. So a lot of the assignments, and I also for a time taught at the Academy of Art after I was finished attending. And yeah, a lot of the curriculum that you give your students, the syllabus that you give your students is like, this is our client. We're going to work on, for example, Tesla. This is actually an assignment I had in like 2008 or 9. And we want you to advertise like, yes, it's an electric car, but it's also incredibly fast. And how can you communicate that idea?
Is this back when Tesla was in those the Lotus bodies?
Yes. This is super, super early days. So, at the time when you're a student, this is like a cool new product. So like, we're not actually working on it, but it's exciting to like imagine like, what if I'm really working at a company, at an advertising agency where we're pitching this client, we've got to show them a whole bunch of cool ideas and they're going to hopefully buy one. And then the advertising agency gets the account for X number of months or quarters or whatever, and you're making all the advertising for them. You're the agency of record. So that's sort of the scenario, the dream scenario that you're in an advertising school, pretending that you're actually working, that you're doing the job.
So we've blended having a neighbor who was going and then kind of getting roped in and then becoming a instructor at the school. What kind of a duration are we talking about? Is this a months, years process?
This was a year's process. So, sometime after I had like become aware of this as copywriting as a profession, I needed to do some more research on it. And to anyone out there who's curious, I think one of the best books you can read on copywriting as a profession and what a copywriter does in their day-to-day and some good techniques and tips for good copywriting is called Hey Whipple, Squeeze This by Luke Sullivan. I think it's been recently updated too, but yeah, it's full of great tips from a long tenured copywriter. Great insights into like what this person does in their job. Great tips for the creative process for creative writing, how to be a copywriter. Um, Really fascinating book. Really useful book too. I think both for anyone who thinks about being a copywriter or wants to work with one and kind of is curious about how do you all think and what do you do all day?
It's quite a title. What is a Whipple?
So if you recall, there was I think it was Charmin had Mr. Whipple was the old mascot that they ran
Okay.
in ad campaigns. So it's a super dated reference.
Yeah.
From,
Yeah.
I think from like the 70s.
Yeah.
They went for like a mascot kind of approach to their advertising, and it worked for a time. This was kind of a riff on an old campaign for the title.
Interesting. I'm old enough to remember those commercials. I did not remember the name of the fellow. When do you first start finding yourself in a role where you're doing this kind of work?
That would be 2009 or 10, I want to say. I was kind of at the tail end of my graduate education at the Academy of Art. And at the time, I had some people in my circle who knew I was going to school for advertising, and they would reach out to me for help. So I'd start kind of freelancing on the side while I was in school. I'd help with web copy for folks. Something as small as like, hey, like help us write like a greeting card for a party we're throwing. It was like these small assignments. And while this was going on, you know, I'm still working as a bartender at the beach and park chalet across the city, doing freelance work. I'm going to grad school, and two of my classmates who are really strong. One was a really great copywriter as well. One was a really good art director. You know, we'd talk amongst ourselves after class, and we thought, you know, we should like drop out and like start our own agency. Like, you know, we're older. We don't want to like, we're older than like some of the undergrad kids. We don't want to start as juniors at some small agency and like, you know, just be making peanuts and, you know, barely doing any cool work for the first year or two of our careers. We want to like charge out the door and be doing cool stuff right away. So, you know, with like a semester or two to go, because the academy is expensive. It's, you know, it's a very for-profit school, and I learned a lot there. But none of us were eager to pay for another semester and change there. So, you know, because we totally knew what we were doing, and we were going to change the world with our great, brilliant, creative ideas, we all dropped out, and we formed a small agency together. And you know, I lucked onto our first client by meeting this person at a bar and hearing that they were a VP of marketing at a tech company. Struck up a conversation, and next thing you know, we had our first client. And
Wow.
yeah, it was completely serendipitous. And we picked up a couple some other small clients along the way. We were able to get a sublease for some office space at one of our former teachers who turned into a great mentor of ours in North Beach. So we had our own office. We were able to start paying ourselves shortly after that, we had like a pretty ridiculous first couple of years.
That's quite a start.
It was quite a start. Like we launched much harder than we thought we were going to, but it was great. You know, we were working long hours, but we were making cool stuff. We weren't making a lot of money. We were kind of just making enough to get by. But, you know, building out the creative portfolio with like not just student work, but real work, like that was actually seeing the light of day, was really satisfying. And, you know, it certainly came with as you're aware, like the bumps of having your own business, and the stress, and, you know, looking at the projections and figuring out like, okay, well, we need to be focused on more business development because like the pipeline is like shrinking after this. We don't know when the next job's going to come. And yeah, a lot of stress and long hours and late nights, but a lot of fun. Learned a ton. We won a couple awards too, and became like ingratiated with the head of the Academy of Art. She loved our story. Elisa Stevens loved that we had attended the Academy and then started our own thing. We actually ended up doing quite a bit of work for them for a while. got some office space through them for a bit, and we also started teaching an internship style class through them. So we had a class we were running. We had some additional office space. Won an award for a cool, like, sort of interactive lookbook we'd done back when, like, augmented reality was kind of just getting off the ground. When you had just started hearing about QR codes, and we all kind of joked, like, nothing's gonna, like, marketers love this idea of QR codes. They're not going anywhere. Well, fast forward 7 years and a global pandemic makes QR codes like, sort of a de rigueur, but it was a really special time. But yeah, after 4 years, one of our partners, he had twins, and so his financial requirements went up quite a bit, and we weren't making enough money for him to support his family, his growing family. So after some Hail Marys and some difficult decisions, one of those Hail Marys is kind of funny. We pitched the owners of WhatsApp on some campaign ideas right before Facebook bought them.
Wow.
Yeah, that was we were this close to, we were like sitting across for some future billionaires.
Wow.
Right before they sold. That was a wild time. But that was one of those last kind of ditch efforts to get a big account. Didn't quite work out, and then we had to, kind of wind things down and go our own way, go our separate ways. But hell of an experience. Wouldn't have traded it for anything. Would not have, wanted to go get a typical junior agency job somewhere else for the experience that we had.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here with Cooper's Code, please extend our reach by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and consider sharing an episode with a friend. Additionally, we want to know who you want to hear on the show. Have an interview suggestion? Email us at podcast@coopers.law. With your permission, I'd like to kind of use that agency period to start delving a little bit into the concept of marketing and what an individual like yourself offers. I'm going to use law firms since most of the people who listen to this are lawyers, but just, I would say, firms in general. What types of services does an agency offer, and how do you help kind of educate a client, or say our listeners, in terms of the types of things that they may benefit from in terms of bringing someone on board?
Good question. Big question. The world of marketing is massive. I mean, like law, you have how many different disciplines, how many sub-disciplines and specialties. There are just so many things that, so many questions that can be answered with, well, it depends. What are your goals? What kind of business are you? Who are you trying to talk to? Who's your primary audience? And, what kind of resourcing do you have? What are you willing and not willing to do to grow your firm? How much growth is good growth to you? Like, how much are you willing to invest and spend? Everyone has different answers to all these questions. So there's your own needs to consider first before you go looking for an agency. And then once you've kind of answered those, or at least had some discussion about those questions internally, then you can start looking for who you want to work with. Now, agencies, a lot of them will say they're full service. A lot of them will say they specialize. And both can be true, and both can be disingenuous. Some people claim to specialize in a thing, and it turns out they're really good at a bunch of other stuff too, but the specialty was the way they got in the door. That's how they marketed and positioned themselves. Some agencies claim to be full service, but really they only do 1, 2, or 3 things. Maybe not all that great either, but it really depends. I think, we have agencies that specialize in more traditional stuff, like your billboards and your bus wraps and your out of home, as we call it, television advertising. There are some agencies that brand themselves as like digital agencies. So like everything that's online, we take care of all of that. There are some folks who are just going to say they're content marketing agencies. So maybe we just do we do blog posts and email and maybe some social stuff. Maybe we just do social stuff. Maybe we just do SEO. And that's a whole other big thing too. Maybe we focus more on brand and brand identity. So we create the look and feel of your product or service. And then maybe someone else goes and figures out how to promote and advertise, but we define how you look. Like a branding agency is its own thing often. That could be more product focused agencies or service focused agencies that get into like kind of the nuts and bolts of your business and figure out like what can we retool so we can like kind of package things into different sorts of offers for folks, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And what I'd like to do is break some of these terms down a little bit. And here's what I mean by that. I think most people have heard a lot of these terms. They've heard branding, they've heard SEO, they've heard social media. And I think people will start making presumptions about what those terms mean that may be different in your world than the outside world. And so when I'm asking to break some of these terms down, like you describe a branding agency. What, from your perspective, would branding be, and how would a branding agency be different than, say, an agency that focuses on social media? And so that's what I'm asking in terms of the breakdown, because most of our listeners are going to be people who have some understanding of this. They're not going to be the big firm marketers that have billboards all over the place. And some of our people may be solos who do primarily referral-based marketing, but they'll have heard a little bit of, oh, well, my web person tells me I need to do more SEO, or I feel like I should be doing more social media, or I should be doing some branding. But they may not have a agency understanding of what those terms mean.
Sure.
Maybe we can break some of these things down. I'll start with branding just because that seems like a straightforward one that I think when you dig into it, some people may have a different understanding of what it actually means.
Off the bat, I'm just going to say another resource. I know we put stuff in the show notes a lot. Here's a great one. The Brand Gap by Randy Newmeyer, I think it is. He's sort of a legend in the advertising and branding world, and he does a great, he does these great books that are not very long. They're super quick reads. They read like a really good presentation, in that like each page is kind of like its own slide with like, a very communicative graphic of some kind that's very simple and like a handful of words. So like you can read these books really quickly, but the points and the insights you get from them are really valuable. But a brand is basically like, it's your identity. It's your company's identity. And it's, there are different aspects and elements to this. But like some of the things that come together to make a brand identity are color choice, a logo, which comprises a logo mark and a logo type. So a logo type includes the words. A logo mark is just the image. So Nike, as an example, the logo mark is the swoosh. The type is the word Nike and the font or typeface that they've chosen to spell that word out. So these are the things that come to mind pretty readily when folks think of a brand. Is like what's the logo mark or logo type? But that's not all that a brand is. There's the color choice. There is what people remember your brand for. You can make a logo, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot until you've attached some context to it. So what are the actions? If your brand is like a character in a story, this is like there's a whole popular framework too called story branding that delves into like Jungian archetypes and using psychology to like, to help place a brand, like to help imprint a brand into a person's conscious. There's some fascinating stuff about that too.
I think we are going to need to unpack that a bit just because of the overlap with some of the issues within theme development in cases.
Yeah.
So I think there is an overlap. And well, I don't know that, I think it would probably be an entire episode on story branding and Jungian archetypes potentially. If you can give a 30,000 foot view, just so you're not leaving people hanging on that, it would be fantastic.
Well, like I've heard you say a lot of lawyering, good lawyering in a trial especially is storytelling. So you have these, your client and the defendant are characters in this story, right? And there are things competing for our attention all day, every day. There's something like, I don't know, how are we up to like 30,000 marketing messages the average person sees a day or some ridiculous number. Who knows? Maybe that's low. But
wow.
The idea is that, we're in an attention economy. So by using archetypes, like things that are readily built into like people's mythologies and stories that are sort of universal, like there's always like a trickster character in human mythology, there's always like kind of a hero character. There's often a magician type character. Finding these sorts of archetypes in ways that you can kind of align your brand with an archetype helps to develop like an emotional connection between a potential customer and your brand. Because as much as we think people are rational, they're not. They make decisions based on emotion, and you as a lawyer know that probably better than anyone. And so we need to appeal to them on an emotional level. So being able to say something like, "Oh, well, our toothpaste, makes your teeth 30% whiter than the competitors." Nobody cares about that. Nobody responds to that really. They might respond to is, your toothpaste is a certain color that they like because they like it from something in their childhood, perhaps, or maybe a competitor's toothpaste is owned by some company that some people think is evil, some parent company that some people think is evil. So aligning your toothpaste as the good guy toothpaste. This is a very far-fetched example, by the way, but not too far-fetched because this kind of stuff goes on in marketing strategies all the time. How can we find something memorable and emotional and different to make a brand stand out, attract the audience that we want, and put a stake in the ground, plant a flag, as it were. Because if you try to if you have a brand that's kind of been designed by committee and kind of looks like it could be anything to anyone, then no one's really going to care, especially if you're not established yet.
That's an interesting point because now you're starting to talk about the way that the client works with the agency or with the creative you. And how do you run that fine line between making sure you deliver the client what they want and not having something so watered down that it is meaningless? Does that make sense?
It does. And this is the eternal struggle. This is the never ending sort of tension between someone who, very much like is looking at the bottom line and thinking, okay, well, I need something that's going to be proven to work. And well, unfortunately, like with a lot of things in life, nothing's guaranteed. A lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of marketing, a lot of anything takes an element of risk and the willingness to do something that's a little bold or maybe a lot bold and at least a little different, but ideally a lot different. So taking big swings, looking at what's going on in your field, what's working, what's if we look at everyone advertising for personal injury in California, whose advertising is working? Why do we think it's working? What are the campaigns that are really standing out? As an example, that goes back to branding too. Having an identity that's recognizable is important. When you see, as an example, if I mention like, oh, I saw some ads that had a blue background and yellow kind of scripted type, and the face of a lawyer on it, would you be able to like, whose advertising I'm talking about?
I believe I probably would.
We don't have to say their name.
I'm torn about whether to delve into names, but I see where you're going with that.
Part of it's the ubiquity, and part of it's like the fact that they've spent a lot of money kind of blanketing our local area in their advertising for X number of quarters. And they have a well-designed color palette. They have a script they have like a typeface and treatment and identity that looks different from other advertising, from other legal services that I've seen advertised. It looks a cut above. It looks premium. It looks well done.
I would call this kind of direct to consumer marketing. Would that be a fair? And I think you used a different phrase. Out of home, or OOH, if you want to have the cool acronym for it. OOH. I probably won't remember that.
Advertising also full of acronyms.
The challenge I see, and I think billboard advertising is worth talking about for a little bit, because one of the common things I hear from people not in my field is the explosion of lawyer billboard advertising. And if you travel to Los Angeles, if you travel out to Las Vegas, and it's happening more and more in the Bay Area as well, there are lots of lawyers who are doing the direct marketing strategy. And the question I have for you is, how do you stand out in that environment without, say, a race to the bottom? And by race to the bottom, I'm thinking there was a famous one back in the day, Mike the Hammer. I'm Mike the Hammer so-and-so, and I will fight for you. And they were so corny and so over the top, but you remembered them. And one of the things I remember is an interview of him on NPR. And he was an incredibly astute, well-read individual who said, yeah, my marketing would turn people like myself off, but it's effective because it stands out from everyone else. I have just a personal concern that we as lawyers in this field are doing our whole field a disservice by some of the race to the bottom advertising that is out there. So are there ways that a firm can consider how to brand themselves, how to position themselves, how to get their message out, where they can look different and not make the whole industry look terrible?
Yeah, absolutely. The theme here is differentiation, right? At a certain level, almost anything becomes a parody product. And I don't mean parody like a Weird Al Yankovic song. I mean parody like PARITY. Like it's the same thing. Like toothpaste, I think I brought up as an example earlier. All toothpaste kind of does the same thing. It all gets your teeth clean, or at least feeling clean. There's really so few sort of additional benefits or marginal gains, to use a cycling term, that you can like affix to your product and advertising messages to make people really care, more than like that. You're not gonna like move the needle with like by saying like, well, this, we have 9 out of 10 dentists instead of 8 out of 10 saying like we're the one we should use. So that's where you have to like create a story. You have to figure out like what's really unique about your product and service, and have that balance in context with, well, who are you trying to talk to? Who's your target audience? And when we talk about target audience, we need to focus. Small brands get big because they started with a very small, very focused audience. This ridiculous shirt I'm wearing is a perfect example. If you ride bikes at all, you know that this is a riff on Rafa.
And I'm going to put some audio to the visual for those who are not watching on YouTube, but who are listening along. Your shirt says pasta. And it says pasta in a particular color and a particular font and with particular punctuation in a way that in the cycling world would make people think of
Rafa. Thank you. I've forgotten there are people who just listen to this and don't watch it, which I should know better than anyone. So origin stories, Rafa started off as a very small company. It did have some ex-Nike people who worked on it in its early days. So they knew what they were doing. But like Nike, started with a very small target audience. Nike, when it started, was very hyper-focused on the dedicated runner. Not necessarily like a superstar athlete, but someone who went out and ran every day. And that's who they spoke to. Their early ads were some of the best long-form copy ads I've ever read. Talk about, what it means to be a dedicated runner, and like it's kind of like trials by miles sort of thing, getting out and lacing up every day. I think there is no finish line was the headline.
I'm going to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
If Trials by Miles is not already copyrighted, perhaps we should be thinking about
verbal copyright. You heard it here. Trials by Miles. Shoot. I love it. Yeah. So I think there is no finish line was the headline of the first famous Nike ad. And it was just about lacing up your shoes every day and getting out there. And this is when Nike was like selling shoes. They were still based in Oregon, but just selling shoes out of the back of like a car. They grew from there to like, they happened to tap into the running community becoming like a much bigger thing in the US, and like jogging becoming more of a pastime and sport for lots of folks. But they spoke to this, this runner who was already super dedicated, and now like here's a brand talking to them and speaking their language. And then also, then tangentially, the people who want to be those people, these aspirational runners, when they see that, they're getting stoked too. So Rafa had an almost identical sort of beginning in that they made really well-crafted cycling clothing, but they spoke specifically to the hardcore cyclist. And, now that's kind of cringe. I'm like, oh, the hardcore roadie, the mammal, there's plenty of tropes and jokes about that, but it, focusing on that audience is what made Rafa grow into the behemoth that arguably they're on a bit of a downturn now, but they became huge because they focused very specifically on a very specific audience. So getting that crystal clear in your firm's mind of who do you want for a client, who do you want to talk to, and don't be afraid to get a little weird about it. Really get into the details and the minutia of what these people do and what they go through. Now, it can be tricky for personal injury because no one goes out shopping for personal injury. Yeah. No one's waking up looking to get hit by a bus or, fall into a combine or something horrible. It's a different sort of trickier approach. And it still is very relevant to have a clear, detailed picture of who you want to talk to. Because this helps you get into the mindset of, okay, what do they care about? What are they thinking about? And then that can get you started in thinking of ways that you can talk to them effectively and authentically. I think, authenticity is a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, almost ad nauseum. And it's important. People can smell bullshit. Even more than ever, we have more savvy, technologically, digitally, and marketing wise savvy folks who smell BS and be like, no, this is just some corporate shilling going on. This is some pandering, not into it, and just turn off. Getting a real connection with folks is really important. But that starts with figuring out who they are and who you want to talk to.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our conversation with Zach Morvant, creative extraordinaire. Tune in next week for part 2. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who you feel we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.